An 18-year-old black teenager walks into court accused of stealing a car. Everyone thinks he's guilty. Even his own lawyer has given up. But when this young man stands up and decides to defend himself, what happens next will leave the entire courtroom in shock. Stay with us until the end. You won't believe how this story unfolds. If this story moves you, like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more powerful stories like this one. The morning air in downtown Chicago was cold and damp as gray clouds hung low over the city like a warning. Inside the Cook County Courthouse, Judge Walter Benson walked through the back hallway of courtroom 204 with his usual mechanical pace, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand, and a folder under his arm. At 61, the judge had seen more cases than he cared to count. Drug offenses, gang violence, thefts, and worse. To him, most of them blurred together. Just another docket number. Another kid from the South Side standing trial. He entered the courtroom, nodded curtly to the bailiff, and sat at the elevated bench. The murmurs in the courtroom died down as the heavy wooden door creaked shut behind him. His eyes scanned the file once more before glancing up. Case number 84739, State of Illinois versus Jamil Harper, the clerk announced. The defendant rose. He was a young black man, barely 18, with close-cropped hair, lean frame, and dark brown eyes that held something rare: focus. He wore an oversized khaki suit jacket clearly given to him by the public defender's office, and it drooped off his shoulders awkwardly. The courtroom watched him with a mix of disinterest and judgment. Just another troublemaker, some might have thought, especially the jury. Jamil stood beside his court-appointed lawyer, Brian Drake, a pale, middle-aged man with thinning hair and the energy of someone 3 hours past caring. Judge Benson observed the young man, then looked down at the report. Charges: grand theft auto, resisting arrest, and evading law enforcement, he said flatly. Allegedly occurred on January 14th at approximately 3:22 p.m. on the intersection of 95th and Halstead. In the front row of the gallery, a tired-looking black woman sat wringing her hands. Her name was Rhonda Harper, and she hadn't slept well since her son's arrest. She wore a faded coat, shoes with worn soles, and her face held the weathering of decades spent surviving through poverty, loss, and now fear. The prosecution was led by Assistant State Attorney Martin Hendricks, a sharp-featured white man with a polished gray suit and a permanent smirk that smelled of privilege. Hendricks was the kind of man who spoke like every sentence was a closing argument and viewed every black boy in court as a future convict, not a potential human being. He stood up, buttoned his jacket with flair, and began. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is simple. A stolen 2018 Dodge Charger. Witnessed fleeing the scene, pursued by patrol units. Fingerprints on the steering wheel. Suspect apprehended in a backyard 2 blocks from the scene. Sweating, panting, and belligerent." Some jurors nodded. A few scribbled notes. One man, middle-aged, white, adjusted his glasses and stared directly at Jamil like he'd already made up his mind. Another woman in the back stifled a yawn. Hendricks walked slowly past the jury box as he added, "This isn't just about a stolen car. This is about public safety, about the kind of person who thinks he's above the law, who runs from accountability, who believes consequences don't apply to him." Jamil didn't flinch, but the words cut deeper than any knife. He could feel the silent judgment bleeding from the courtroom walls. Not one word about him as a person, only as a profile. His public defender rose clumsily, papers spilling from his folder. "Your Honor, the defense will—" But before he could finish, Jamil stepped forward and spoke, his voice clear and controlled. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Judge Benson narrowed his eyes. "You're not supposed to address the court directly, Mr. Harper. Your attorney will—" "I'd like to represent myself, sir," Jamil said, not with arrogance but determination. A rustle went through the courtroom. The bailiff raised an eyebrow. A chuckle came from somewhere in the back row. One of the jury members whispered to another, "What's he think this is, TV?" Judge Benson leaned forward, folding his hands. "You understand what you're asking? This isn't a school project. You're facing serious charges that could result in prison time." "I understand, but this is my life, sir, and no one knows it better than me." Brian Drake exhaled with a visible relief, as though the weight of even pretending to care had just been lifted. The judge studied the boy. Something in Jamil's tone, measured, thoughtful, gave him pause. "Very well. The court will allow it, but proceed carefully." Jamil nodded once. As the prosecution continued presenting its case, Jamil stood silently, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. Hendricks continued to weave his narrative, tossing in subtle racial cues. "He ran through backyards, just like you see on the news. Hoodie, baggy jeans, loud music in his pockets. It was death by 1,000 implications." During a recess, Jamil sat alone at the defendant's table. A few guards passed by and snickered. "Thinking you smart, huh?" one muttered under his breath. "Yeah, you'll make a real good lawyer, from a jail cell." Jamil said nothing. He remembered something his mother told him as a child. "They'll try to break you in 1,000 ways. Just make sure you're the one still standing when it's over." Back in the courtroom, Jamil looked up at Judge Benson and then at the jury. He knew they saw his skin first, then the charges, then the smirk on Hendricks' face. The truth was still invisible to them, but that would change. He would make sure of it. Tomorrow, his defense would begin, and the real fight would start. The next morning, sunlight broke through the gray haze over Chicago, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. Inside courtroom 204, the atmosphere had shifted. Whispers moved through the gallery like cold wind, curious eyes darting toward the defendant's table where Jamil Harper sat alone. No attorney beside him, only a legal pad filled with scribbled notes and questions circled in pencil. The boy who dared to speak for himself. Judge Benson entered at precisely 9 a.m. sharp. He took his seat without a word, but his eyes paused briefly on Jamil. An acknowledgement, maybe, or perhaps just curiosity. Across the aisle, Prosecutor Martin Hendricks sat smugly, surrounded by his files, confident that any first strike Jamil attempted would crumble before it hit the jury box. "Mr. Harper," Judge Benson said, adjusting his glasses, "are you ready to begin your cross-examination of the prosecution's witness?" Jamil stood. "Yes, Your Honor." He walked toward the stand where Officer Michael Kelly, a stocky white cop in his late 30s, sat in uniform. Kelly had testified the previous day that he positively identified Jamil behind the wheel of the stolen Dodge Charger, initiating the pursuit. Jamil faced him directly. "Officer Kelly," he began calmly, "you stated that you saw me at the wheel of the car at approximately 3:22 p.m., correct?" "That's right," Kelly answered. "And you gave chase immediately after that?" "Correct." "And you also wrote in your report that you pursued the vehicle through several intersections, then later pursued a suspect on foot." "Yes." Jamil flipped a page in his notes and held up a printed record. "Your cruiser, number 623B, is equipped with GPS tracking, correct?" Kelly blinked. Yeah, standard issue. And these logs, Jamil handed a copy to the judge and jury, show that your vehicle was parked at the 1100 block of Jackson Avenue until 3:36 p.m. That's almost 15 minutes after you said you saw me. How do you explain that? Kelly's face twitched. That must be a malfunction or a delay in the log. Or, Jamil said, steady, unwavering, you weren't anywhere near the scene when it happened. A low murmur spread through the courtroom. Hendricks rose immediately. Objection, argumentative. Sustained, the judge said, but not before raising an eyebrow at the officer. Jamil didn't press it. He took a step back. No further questions, he said, and returned to his seat. Hendricks stood with visible tension in his jaw. He had underestimated the boy, and he knew it now. Still, he wasn't about to give Jamil the momentum. The prosecution calls its second witness, Detective Lana Pearson, he announced. A white woman in a dark gray pantsuit took the stand. She was younger than Kelly, but equally dismissive in her demeanor. Her testimony focused on the physical evidence. Jamil's fingerprints on the steering wheel, a report from forensics confirming the match. When it was Jamil's turn to question her, he walked back to the stand, calm and direct. Detective Pearson, you mentioned fingerprints found on the wheel. Did the report determine when those prints were left? No, she said. Fingerprint analysis can't determine time of contact. Did the report indicate how many people's prints were on the wheel? 3 sets. Were the other 2 identified? No, just yours. Jamil nodded. So the fact that my prints were there means I touched the car at some point. It doesn't mean I stole it. Objection, Hendricks snapped. He's making conclusions. Sustained, the judge replied. Jamil turned to the jury anyway. Let me ask it this way. If I try on a jacket in a store, that doesn't make me a thief, does it? The courtroom stirred. Hendricks visibly bristled. Several jurors shifted in their seats, glancing at each other. Jamil walked slowly back to the defense table. The rest of the day continued with the prosecution trying to patch the holes Jamil had opened. Hendricks replayed a grainy traffic cam video that showed a car speeding down an avenue, but no clear image of the driver. He leaned heavily on reasonable assumptions, attempting to build the narrative on mood, on suspicion, on the way Jamil looked and acted. Outside the courtroom during a short recess, Jamil waited alone by the water fountain when a courthouse guard walked by and smirked. You think you're smart, huh? You think they're going to believe some hood kid over a cop? Jamil looked the man dead in the eyes. They'll believe the truth. The guard scoffed and walked away. Back in the courtroom, Hendricks requested to bring back Officer Kelly for clarification. It was a transparent move, damage control. Kelly re-entered and tried to reframe his previous testimony, insisting that he may have misstated the timing of his arrival. Jamil stood again. Officer Kelly, is it your habit to include false timelines in official reports? Objection, Hendricks yelled. That's badgering. Sustained, said Judge Benson, this time with a deeper frown. Jamil didn't care. The cracks were showing. The jury was listening now, not just hearing. As the day ended, Judge Benson announced the adjournment and instructed the jury to return tomorrow. Jamil gathered his papers quietly, his back aching from the hard courtroom bench, his throat dry from speaking. As he left the courtroom, he saw his mother again, standing in the back, arms folded, eyes filled with a mixture of pride and worry. Outside, a local news crew waited near the courthouse steps, cameras pointed at the entrance. He's representing himself, a reporter said into the mic. A black teenager accused of grand theft auto taken on the entire prosecution alone. Jamil kept walking, ignoring the noise. He didn't care about the headlines. Tomorrow he would show them what they missed. By the time the court reconvened on the third day, the tension in the air had thickened. The gallery was noticeably more crowded. Students, activists, even a few reporters had taken interest in the boy representing himself. Whispers floated through the courtroom. "He's good. Real good. You hear what he did yesterday?" Some were just curious to see him crash. Others had started rooting for him. Jamil Harper entered quietly, wearing the same wrinkled khaki suit, but this time he carried himself with more certainty. His legal pad was fuller now, notes scrawled in tight handwriting, underlined and starred. His mother, Rhonda, was in the front row again, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her jaw clenched. Judge Benson, always punctual, entered and gavelled in the session. "Mr. Harper, you may continue with your defense." Jamil rose. "Your Honor, I'd like to call my first witness." This surprised Hendricks, who leaned forward. "Objection. Mr. Harper didn't submit a witness list." Jamil didn't flinch. "I informed the court and prosecution in writing yesterday during recess, per the rules of pro se defense." The list was handed to the clerk. Judge Benson looked to the clerk, who confirmed with a nod. "Objection overruled. Proceed, Mr. Harper." Jamil called Thomas Kennedy, a 50-year-old white man and manager at a local convenience store just 2 blocks from the scene of the alleged crime. Kennedy approached the stand nervously, but respectfully. "Mr. Kennedy, do you remember the afternoon of January 13th? "I believe so, yes." "Did you see me that day?" "Yes. You came into the store, bought a bottle of water and a protein bar, I think." Jamil paced slowly. "Did anything unusual happen while I was outside the store afterward?" Kennedy cleared his throat. "Yeah, there was a car stuck in the snow outside, and I saw you and another young man helping push it out." Jamil nodded. "Can you describe the car?" "Silver Dodge Charger. Looked new." Jamil turned to the jury. "And at any point did I steal that car?" "No. You touched it, yeah, but you helped push it. The guy drove off after." "Thank you." Hendricks jumped up. "Mr. Kennedy, are you certain the defendant was helping and not trying to break into the car?" "I was standing right outside the store. I watched it happen. They were clearly helping." Jamil's calm demeanor never cracked. He knew every moment like this mattered. Every truth he pulled into the light chipped away at the walls built around him. Next, he requested that Detective Pearson's forensic report be entered into evidence again. He approached the board and wrote in large letters, 3 sets of prints. "To be clear," he addressed the jury, "the report states there were 3 sets of prints found on the steering wheel. Only one was identified, mine. The others remain unknown." He looked up. "The prosecution has made it seem like my prints alone prove guilt, but there's no video of me in the car. No eyewitness, and the police can't tell when the prints were left." Hendricks objected again, but this time it felt weaker, automatic. Judge Benson didn't interrupt. He watched Jamil with increasing interest. Jamil continued, voice steady. "If you borrow your friend's phone to make a call, your prints will be on it. That doesn't make you a thief. Fingerprints alone don't prove intent. Don't prove guilt." A woman on the jury, an older Latina in a beige cardigan, nodded slightly. But Hendricks wasn't done. He called Officer Tim Rowe to testify, another white officer, one who had been involved in the foot pursuit. He claimed to have tackled Jamil in a yard just minutes after the suspect fled the vehicle. Jamil stepped forward with care. Officer Rowe, how many blocks from the vehicle were you when you apprehended me? 3, maybe 4. And what were you told about me before the pursuit? Rowe hesitated. Dispatch said a suspect had fled a stolen Dodge Charger on foot. Young black male in a hoodie. Jamil raised an eyebrow. So, I was stopped because I'm black and wearing a hoodie? Rowe shifted uncomfortably. You match the description, which consisted of 2 things, skin color and clothing. Yes. Jamil turned to the jury. How many young black men in hoodies were walking in that neighborhood that day? You think I was the only one? No answer, just silence. He approached the board again, wrote, no video, no witness, no timestamp. Everything in this case is assumption, he said firmly, not proof. You've been asked to believe a version of events based on how I look and where I'm from. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear papers rustle. Then, as if on cue, Hendricks tried a low blow. Mr. Harper, isn't it true that you were suspended in high school for fighting? That you had prior run-ins with police? Jamil paused. He breathed in. I was suspended once for breaking up a fight. And, yes, I've been stopped by police before, for walking home, for waiting at a bus stop, for existing. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, relevance? Sustained, Judge Benson said quickly. Jamil looked back at Hendricks. I'm not on trial for being black. I'm on trial for something I didn't do. For a second, just a flicker, Hendricks faltered. Jamil ended the day with one more point. He requested body cam footage from Officer Kelly, who had claimed to approach the car. The footage showed him arriving after the vehicle had already been abandoned. It was the final blow for the day. Court adjourned. Outside, reporters swarmed the sidewalk. Rhonda Harper clutched her son's arm as they exited through the front door. You're shaking things up, she whispered. I'm just telling the truth, he replied. But that's what scares them the most, she said. The city lights flickered to life above the courthouse. Tomorrow would be the turning point. Jamil wasn't afraid. He was just getting started. By the 4th day of trial, the courtroom no longer felt like a chamber of certainty. It was now a battlefield of words, tension, and crumbling illusions. The public benches filled early, and a line formed outside the door. Word had spread across the city. An 18-year-old black teenager was standing up to the system and winning. Jamil Harper entered quietly, his wrinkled jacket still hanging off his shoulders, but today he moved with a sharper purpose. His eyes scanned the room like a chess player seeing the final moves. Judge Benson noticed it too. The boy was focused, prepared, and far more composed than many lawyers he'd seen in his decades on the bench. Prosecutor Hendricks, however, looked different. Not shaken, but unsettled. His tidy appearance was intact, but the confidence in his voice had dulled. He shuffled through his folders more frequently, checked his notes too often. He had watched his straightforward case become a symbol, and now that symbol was aiming directly at him. Mr. Harper, Judge Benson said, nodding toward him. You may proceed. Jamil stood slowly and took a deep breath. Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence a document I received through a public records request, specifically the initial police report filed by the vehicle owner, Mr. Alan Fletcher. He handed copies to the clerk who distributed them to the judge, jury, and prosecution. Hendricks glanced at the document. As his eyes scanned the text, his jaw tensed. Jamil addressed the jury. In this report, Mr. Fletcher described the man he saw fleeing his vehicle. I'd like to read the statement he gave the responding officer. He opened the folder and read directly. Suspect appeared to be a young white male, around 5'10", wearing a gray sweatshirt and jeans. I didn't get a look at his face, but he was definitely not black or Hispanic. The courtroom stilled. All sound seemed to vanish. Jamil looked up slowly, locking eyes with each juror. This is the original report. It was filed the same day, but this statement was never shared with me by the prosecution. In fact, I found it myself through a third-party request after my attorney failed to mention it. Judge Benson leaned forward. "Mr. Hendricks," he said sharply, "was this document submitted as part of discovery?" Hendricks stood. "Your Honor, it must have been overlooked." "Overlooked?" The judge's voice dropped, dangerous. "A direct contradiction to your theory of the suspect's identity was overlooked?" "I assure the court—" "No," Jamil interrupted, stepping forward. "You don't get to assure anything. Not after trying to lock me away for something I didn't do. You've made this entire trial about what I look like, where I'm from, not what actually happened." He turned to the jury again. "This report confirms that the person who stole the car couldn't have been me, and the prosecution either ignored it or deliberately buried it." A murmur rippled through the gallery. One juror, a younger black man in the back row, rubbed his temple, visibly disturbed. Judge Benson requested a recess and left the bench without another word. In the hallway outside, reporters swarmed. Jamil didn't speak. He sat on the bench beside his mother, who took his hand and gripped it tight. "You were never supposed to win this," she whispered, "but you're doing it anyway." Inside the judge's chambers, Benson stared down at the report, then at the file in front of him. Everything had felt routine at the start. Another theft, another chase, another poor kid headed for lockup. But this wasn't routine anymore. The system had blinked, and the boy refused to be swallowed by it. When court resumed, Judge Benson's voice was calm but icy. "This court is disturbed by the prosecution's failure to disclose key evidence. This calls into question the integrity of these proceedings." Hendricks tried to defend himself, but his arguments fell flat. Even the jury sensed desperation in his words now. Jamil didn't need to say more. He had already said enough. As the judge adjourned the day, the courtroom erupted into low conversations. People stood, eyes locked on Jamil, not with pity, but respect. He gathered his papers in silence. As he walked past the prosecution's table, Hendricks refused to look at him. Out in the corridor, Rhonda Harper embraced her son. "You just knocked down the last brick, baby," she said. "Tomorrow, they won't have anywhere left to hide." And she was right. Tomorrow would be the verdict. But tonight, in the city of steel and silence, a boy had turned the law inside out, not with anger, but with truth. And that truth was now too loud to ignore. The final day arrived with a strange quiet. No reporters shouting on the courthouse steps, no protesters, no flashing cameras, just a stillness, as if the entire building held its breath. In courtroom 204, the seats were full before the bailiff even opened the doors. Lawyers from other cases found excuses to be there. Young black students came wearing ties. Retired veterans from the neighborhood stood along the back wall, arms crossed. They weren't just there to witness a verdict. They were there for justice. Jamil Harper entered the courtroom dressed the same as always. Same baggy suit, same worn-out shoes. But now his posture was different. No fear, no doubt. His head was held high. His mother, Rhonda Harper, was already waiting for him in the front row. Her fingers trembled slightly on her purse, but her eyes burned with something stronger than worry. Pride. Judge Benson walked in, and the room fell into instant silence. The jury had returned earlier than expected. Their deliberation had lasted less than 3 hours. "The jury has reached a verdict," Judge Benson asked, his voice even. The foreman, a black woman in her 60s with silver braids tucked into a bun, stood and held the paper with steady hands. "We have, Your Honor." She handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Benson read it, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up. "In the matter of the state of Illinois versus Jamil Harper on the charges of grand theft auto, resisting arrest, and evading law enforcement, the jury finds the defendant," a pause, "not guilty on all counts." A sound escaped the room. A collective gasp, followed by tears, followed by cheers. Not loud and chaotic, but warm, almost reverent. Rhonda Harper covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes welled up as she stood, barely able to contain her relief. Jamil remained still for a second, absorbing the words. He closed his eyes, breathed in, then turned to look at the jury. "Thank you," he said softly. Judge Benson pounded his gavel once for silence, then stood. "This court commends the jury for its service. Mr. Harper, you're free to go. Court is adjourned." The gavel hit wood, and with that, the case was over. But for Jamil, it wasn't the end. He stepped down from the defendant's table and was immediately embraced by his mother. They held each other for what felt like hours. Tears rolled down Rhonda's cheeks. Jamil didn't cry. He couldn't. Something inside him was still processing everything. The humiliation, the isolation, the way strangers had laughed when he said he'd defend himself. Hendricks, the prosecutor, quickly packed his papers and slipped out a side door, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. For him, this case was supposed to be easy. Just another number. But now his name would be remembered for the wrong reason, for prosecuting an innocent boy and trying to bury the truth. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, neighbors, supporters, students, even former skeptics. As Jamil stepped through the doors, applause erupted. Some cheered, some simply nodded, but all of them saw him now not as a statistic, but as a fighter. A reporter from Channel 7 stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Jamil, what do you want to say to the people after being acquitted?" He looked at the camera for a long second, then spoke clearly. "I want to say that the system was never built for people like me. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting. I didn't win because I'm special. I won because I didn't give up. And because the truth matters, even when they try to hide it." He turned to walk down the steps. His mother walked beside him, holding his arm. Halfway down, Jamil paused and looked back at the courthouse. The cold, stone pillars, the glass doors, the metal detectors, it had all tried to crush him. But he was still standing. Later that evening, at their small apartment in South Shore, Jamil sat at the table eating dinner with his mother. The TV played in the background, muted, showing images from the courthouse and headlines like, "Teen wins against all odds. Self-defense shatters case. Justice served." Rhonda placed her hand over his. "You did it," she said. He nodded. "I did, but this ain't just about me." She looked at him, confused. "I want to help others now, other kids like me. I don't want to be the exception. I want to make sure I'm not the last one to walk free just because I could speak." She smiled slowly. "Then that courtroom was only your beginning." He nodded. She stood and walked toward the window, gazing out over the neighborhood. Behind her, Jamil took out his legal pad, the same one from court, and began writing. Not legal arguments this time, ideas, plans. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. He walked into that courtroom as just another suspect, but walked out as a symbol of truth, courage, and resistance. Jamil Harper didn't just win his freedom, he exposed the cracks in the system and inspired many to stand up. What do you think about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that matters.